Ladies and gentlemen, please open your ears, open your minds, and help me welcome in Dennis Galloway to the MinddogTV podcast. Dennis, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Mind Dog. I
It-
really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you and your audience.
It's my pleasure to have you here, and I'm sure the audience appreciates you as well. Uh, where are you from, sir?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I grew up as a military brat, so all over the country. I was born in California originally along the coast, but after that, 3 or 4 months later, we traveled up to Richmond, California, and then all of a sudden, when I was a little bit of a kid, we were on a boat going across the ocean, where I grew up a little bit in Germany in kindergarten, and that was
Wow.
like 8 years after the end of World War II. So a lot of stuff still going on over there.
So was that was a U.S. military base in Germany?
There is, but I was over there in '53 with my father.
Okay.
So long time
Wow.
ago.
So have you been writing your whole life?
I have started writing when I was really young, kind of writing like poems to my mother, and stuff like that. But I really started getting serious about writing about 4 or 5 years ago.
Wow.
And that's when I decided, okay, enough of this. I need to publish.
Right. Gotcha. So what was the main driver in your life up? I mean, obviously you were still writing at some point,
Yeah.
but taking it seriously, what was the main driver that made you decide that it's time to take it seriously and get published and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I wanted to reach more people. I had some stories that I've written, and then I decided to devote most of my time to writing. Now, a lot of people write part-time, and that's fine. Just consistency is the key. But at the time in my life, I had more time. I was out of a career, and I decided to switch from a technical career into writing. And because I always wanted to do that. So I took the plunge.
Wow. I think it's kind of the reason I started this program was to encourage people to live the life they wanted to live. And I think a lot of people, and I'm glad you did it 4 or 5 years ago. You finally said, you know what, this is what I feel like I should be doing, and I'm going to do it. So many people avoid that for whatever reason. I mean, we responsibilities and life gets in the way and all that kind of
Sure.
stuff. But I find that to be a cause of major frustration at the end of your life when for some people who I always wanted to do that. I always
Yeah.
wanted to, but
Yeah.
and that's the worst place to be
Yeah.
in when you're at the final quarter of your life or whatever it is, to look back
Exactly.
and say, I wish I had and never did. So
I
what
wanted
was the final thing that gave you that I'm gonna just do it?
Sure. I had something to share. Um, Most of my imagination used to get me in trouble at school because I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah.
But I'm a creative person by nature, and I wanted to use that to, in the beginning, to entertain people, and then it turned into something more. For me, it was a motivation of teaching people certain things I've learned in my life that I can weave into the story. And it's not that I'm a preaching person or anything like that, but some fundamentals like if you have a certain mindset toward writing or toward a job, that will reflect in the decisions you make, and that will affect your outcome results. So I tried to weave things like that in the pen. There's a portion of that that's called Emeralds of Wisdom, and it has the main character, one of the main characters, because there's two of them in this book, that learns from his father about when you really want to do something in life and you dream about it, there's steps that you can take that'll make it a reality. And so in the book, I go through that process in the context of a young Arab man who grew up on the streets of Cairo as an orphan, essentially, and all the things that he went through and what he learned in his life. And that was part of the Emeralds of Wisdom, to teach him about, well, if you really want to do this, if you've really thought about it and it's in your heart and your soul, then there are steps you can take to achieve that. And one of them is developing self-belief, regardless of your circumstances. Like some people say, well, I don't have the money. I don't have the skills or the training. I don't have this or that. The point is, if you get started on it and you believe in yourself and you believe on it and you work on it every day, things will open up to you. There will be conversations that you never thought you'd have with somebody who maybe is connected to somebody else, or maybe some opportunity will show up that you never realized was there because you hadn't put your mind in the state of, I want to do this. I can do this. I will do this. In that kind of state opens up all kinds of things happening because you've made a decision.
Huh.
All right.
Well,
Yeah.
if I may, it sounds like we're talking a little bit deeper than just like confidence and self-confidence, right?
Right.
Because last night I was watching, in preparation for tonight's interview. By the way, Paul Provender will be here tonight. I can't say that enough. But Paul Provender used to do a show called The Green Room, and he'd have very successful comics all in a room. And last night I was watching a clip that he did with Gary Shandling and Ray Romano, a bunch of really very successful guys, and they were all talking about imposter syndrome, how you never get over imposter syndrome. And Gary Shandling, who, you can't get any more successful in the comedy business than he did. And he and so a very young comic was there, and he was a guy who was 20 years old, and he brought up this never feeling like you really fit in, like you really belong. Right. And do you ever get over that? Gary Shandling said, nope, not from anybody I've ever spoken to. There's always that imposter syndrome. Like at some point, no matter how successful you get, you always feel like I'm faking it, and they're gonna find out that I'm not. So talk to me about the difference between self-confidence and what you just talked about this belief that I want to do this, I can do this, and that stuff, compared or compare it to that idea, or involving that idea of I'm not good enough, I'm an imposter, they're going to find out that I'm just faking it here.
Well, there's a couple things you can do. A lot of times confidence comes from success. It builds on itself. So you start out with small accomplishments, like maybe you get up and do some push-ups in the morning, or maybe you get up and make your bed. It's that small step. You made the bed, success. You start by doing things that give you immediate success. Then you can do little projects or ideas you have that take maybe a week. And at the end of the week, success. Those will build on themselves and give you the confidence that you can accomplish what you set your mind to. The other thing you have to realize is a lot of people get put down by others because the people putting you down never succeeded. Right. They always had a lack of self-confidence. So the important thing is what you do, not what they say. By building that a step at a time, you can get there. Right. The feeling, well, I'm not the right person, or who would listen to me? Sure, I go through that too. But then I have to reflect, what is it that I want to say, regardless of people paying attention to it or not? It is something that I feel like I'd like to say or do. Those kinds of things get you out of the realm of being lack of the imposter syndrome. The confidence is part of it, but there's other parts of it that you have value. And when you understand you have value, then you're not faking it. You're being yourself.
I agree. But you did mention, and I don't want to say but, because I'm told not. But means I'm negating what you said. I'm not negating what you said. I agree with what you said. So I'm going to say and. There's this. You mentioned success, and I think part of the issue here, especially with writers, and I find this more with writers than I do with any other art form, is how we measure success is important. And so too many people, I think, who are aspiring writers measure their success right from the start by how many books they sold and that kind of stuff. And I think that could be a trap, because I think the reason you're doing it is for the experience and the journey, for lack of a better word, of writing something and
Right.
creating something and getting done
Hmm.
with it,
Hmm.
and realizing that monetarily successful stuff, the financial success, the selling more books, is a function of keep doing it, and it's going to grow. And your first book is, and got to understand that your first book, if you write a book, a
Yeah.
novel, is going to be competing with probably about 2 million books that got released on that same day.
Yeah.
So you got to tailor your expectations for what success is, and understand that success is also going to come in baby steps, not just the process of writing, but the success that you're anticipating is also going to be done in baby steps. Yes.
Yes, that's true. You have to have a pretty good why you're writing the book.
All right.
Is it for posterity? Is it to tell a story? Is it to make money? Which is okay. The expectations of the answers for each of those is different. And by understanding that it's a different story, then you have to set your outcome that matches what your why is. I always tell people start off with who, what, where, when, why. Don't worry about the how, because you can take a book or a story and just write it on a piece of paper. I don't care if it's got wrong sentences, bad paragraphs. There are things out there called editors that can help clean all of that up. The key is get it down on paper. Get your story out of your chest. Get your emotions in your story. The editor can help you craft it so that people will want to read it and will appreciate it. So a lot of times people, especially young authors, start out, oh, that sentence is wrong. I got to go back and correct it. And they get into this editing mode as they go along and they never finish the story.
All right. I had an author on last night, and she was talking about how she tends to write fast and just kind of write. And when she gets into the mode, she's just writing. And she called it a flaw. And I said, I define that as flow. And
Mhm.
obviously, since you've been writing your whole life, maybe not publishing novels, but writing your whole life,
Yeah.
you had to have developed this idea of flow. You get into the flow, you get into the zone, and that kind of stuff. But for aspiring writers who first time writing, that I don't think that's necessarily a natural thing. And I want to talk about your book specifically, the
Okay.
idea that the pen almost has a mind of its own. I think that's what flow is. It's when you get into the zone, so it's like you're not writing the book is just writing itself, and you're just kind of there. I
Yeah.
think that's a common thing, but it doesn't happen right away. It takes some development. Can you talk about how you get to that point where flow, what I call flow, happens?
You get to it by consistently every day setting down a time that you're going to write and having yourself a quiet place, distractions away from you. So there's nothing that's going to interrupt you, whether that's 15 minutes, half an hour, an hour. Key here is to quiet your mind so that when you have that computer in front of you or you're writing by hand, you will notice that as you practice this habit, all right, I'm sitting down, I'm going to write something, no matter what it is. You start writing a few sentences. Other things will occur to you. Write those down. As you do this process, those things will start bubbling up more and more often, and then it'll start taking shape. Now, depending on the kind of book you're writing, people who are writing fiction tend to work in that way. They don't necessarily know what the outcome is. They go with the flow of where the story is wrapped around the character because they understand what the character is. The character is put in certain situations, and that situation evolves or develops around them, and then your story flows. Nonfiction, you tend to put an outline. Where's this going to go? Here's the summary. Here's the beginning. Here's what I want to talk about. Those become your chapter headings. So you get a tree, you get a skeleton around which you can insert your stories or your information. Uh, I've done both. Well, I love fiction though, because I like to use my imagination with the character in a certain situation. What are they going to do now? They just escaped from their shackles. Where are they going to head? What's going to happen to them? Do they have to jump over a box or go through a door or swing on a rope? All of these things you can add in. But here's an interesting aspect of flow. you'll notice that your flow starts and you start writing down ideas. Oh, here's an idea, here's an idea, here's an idea. And you let that happen. You could always go back after you finish a paragraph or a chapter and look and read through it again, and other things will pop in your head. I'm not talking about correcting the writing. I'm talking about other things that'll add richness or more detail to your story.
Right.
So that's, for me, flow works that way. It starts out and then it gets deeper.
Right. I want to show the cover of the book that I'm referencing right now. It's called The Pen, The Sultan's Wisdom, by Dennis Galloway. And am I correct in that what you were kind of addressing with this whole idea of the pen seems to have a mind of its own? I know it's a little deeper than that, but am I correct in guessing that that has a lot to do with the writer's process of no matter what, separate from the story, the writer's process is kind of encapsulated in the idea of that pen having a mind of its own?
It does, in a sense. When you look at the idea of experiences or suggestions or thoughts occurring, your pen starts writing that down before you even think through the thought, before you even complete the thought. Oh, here's a great idea. Here's something else. And so, in a sense, the story does flow through you, through the pen onto the paper. And it's something that occurs to you as you're writing. It's not something you thought about in great detail years ago or months ago or even several days before you sit down. It occurs as you write.
Interesting stuff. You talked a little bit about characters, and I want to talk about character development and where they come from. I guess an accusatory sense in some way, or at least it's perceived as that when I talk to authors, and I've talked to over 300 of them in the last 2 years, and I always say, I feel like no matter how strong your imagination is, characters aren't coming out of the ether. They're coming out of composites of people and real people that you've known in your life. And a lot of authors take umbrage with that, or they don't want to. They want to be. They don't want to accept that. I'm not accusing them of necessarily not having a strong enough imagination or whatever, however it is perceived. I'm just saying that people and characters, and there's only so many different character traits that human beings can have. So when you're developing a character, you're taking little ideas of people you've actually known and kind of putting them together. What is that process like for you of character development? And does it happen as the book develops, or do you have the characters in mind before you even start?
You're absolutely right about that. In my experience,
Right.
what I do is I'm a people observer. I'm at a restaurant having a cup of coffee and there's a couple arguing over there, or there's a person walking by and they're dressed differently. That sticks in my mind. A lot of times, if there's something significant, I have a file called character file, and I write down on the piece of paper really quick what I observed and what I thought, from viewpoint, from sound, from the dress, or whatever. But it puts down on a piece of paper. I put the file away. It's in my subconscious. So when I start developing a character, I pull from all of that. Well, let's see. Like, for example, Harold in the story of the pen is late 30s. He's a little overweight, losing some hair. He's kind of bored with life. He hasn't taken care of his physical self, so he's a little overweight. Those are characters I've seen in people, especially men who are going through, they're bored with their job. They're bored with their family life. They kind of give up and they're just kind of going through the routine. That's what Harold was doing. And so I drew upon more experiences and people I've met and put in to the characteristics of this book. The librarian, for example, her description and her demeanor comes right out of a character of the librarian in The Mummy. She was a perfect character, a perfect image of what I wanted to have in this role in the book. So I drew from that imagery and knowledge of that person. Al-Hamid, the Sultan, he was a character that, gosh, I've watched so many movies about fighting in Arabia and the people, the Bedouin tribes, and in my mind, there were characters that I remember seeing in roles as Bedouin tribe leaders. I put that imagery in there. So yes, I agree with you 100%. It doesn't necessarily um, develop as a new thought. I've already had those kinds of ideas in my mind as I started writing the book, but
Right.
then I informed the reader a little bit more about that person, a little bit more about their character. I described it enough to give them an idea, but I'm very dependent on the reader having their own understanding what that person should really look like, how
Gotcha.
tall, how heavy,
Right.
what ethnicity. I don't describe that in detail because I want the reader to get involved in the book and make it their own.
Interesting. A lot of interesting things in that answer. First of all, is first thing that kind of piqued my interest is the idea of influence.
Mm.
And I know I've been listening to many comedians lately because that it's just one of the things that one of the phases I'm going through. But in music, it's the same thing. But one, I'm hearing very successful comedians say that you need influence to develop your voice,
Mm.
your artistic voice. But at some point, a lot of them are saying, "I don't listen to other comedians anymore because I don't want that influence coming out in my work. I don't want to. I don't want to find myself subconsciously copying or plagiarizing somebody, or even tapping into the same themes that they do because it feels like and I've always been that way with music. When I'm writing music, I won't listen to anybody else. I won't listen to the radio. I won't go on YouTube and listen for other artists because there is a point where influence is good to
Mm.
to get away from it, but when you're
Mm.
actually doing the work, I cut
Mm.
myself off from influence.
Mm.
What's your take on that?
Writers or readers?
Yeah, that's why I thought it would be more complicated for a writer or somebody because you have to be reading a lot to be a good writer.
Mm.
So that influence is always going to be there, right?
It'll always be there. The key with that type of an approach is not to plagiarize. It's good that you have experience in reading, watching movies, um, finding out the way this is a movie you really liked and how the characters really worked in there, because it'll stay in your subconscious. It will influence your writing. There's no way you can avoid that in reality because you're having experience. When you read and you go through the emotions of that reading or that situation, it develops inside of you as an experience because your subconscious doesn't know any different between what you see and hear or what you think. It's the same stuff as far as the subconscious is concerned. So the key is to have that influence in a positive manner. Have the good books that you read that have good storylines, good characters. Have the movies that you watch to be not just car races and blowing up, but actually that has a good storyline, because then it has meaning to you. And when it has meaning to you, it becomes experiential. When it's experiential, it stays in your subconscious.
Wow. I've never been a huge fiction writer. For some reason, I've always been more attracted to nonfiction.
Mm.
Even in movies and stuff, I find myself watching, if I don't have television, but if I go on YouTube or Netflix or something and I'm looking for something, I find myself in the documentaries
Mm.
section a lot.
Mm.
I'm not sure why that is, but my experience when I do read fiction is sometimes it will take me 10 books to find one, and I'll start and I'm not sure if I'm unusual, and that's in this regard, which is kind of where I'm going with the question. I will start a lot of books and get 2 chapters into them and just give up on them, like this book
Mm.
is not for me. Is that a common experience, do you think?
I think it is because it depends on how the book's written. Also, a lot of times people who are nonfiction readers, they like a lot of facts. They want to know where it's going. They want structure. They want to see, is it worth my time to read this? What am I going to get out of it? A fiction writer has the same challenge when they start the book. They want to make sure that the person who picks the book up or reads the cover or starts your story stays with it, especially if you have in your storyline something that'll benefit the person. So you need to make sure that it's on your cover and your description of your storyline, that the reader will understand there is something there for them too, not just entertainment. For example, the antique pen that Harold picked up, it forced him to write about a man named Al-Hamid in his life. Now, Al-Hamid lived 1,000 years before Harold, and it was a story about him rising from a street urchin to a sultan and all the things that he went through. Well, Harold also had a dream travel when he slept, and he experienced the same things that Al-Hamid went through, all the gains and rich wisdom that changed his life forever. Harold's life, because he learned from Al-Hamid's experiences.
Right.
So I encourage people to read this to discover the ancient wisdom that's in the book that Harold did, and perhaps it'll change their life too. So it's
no question about it. When I find a nonfiction book that I like, it can feel like there's a lot to be learned from fiction, and it's not like I never read fiction. It's just I find there are some authors who just have take a long time to get you engaged and feeling like you're grounded in the world they want to present to you. Sometimes it takes too long to feel like you know a character or you even know the setting well enough, and it feels like I've read 2.5 chapters and I still don't feel grounded in the story. Like I can't be in the story because it just feels too. We're still developing stuff 2.5 chapters in. You understand what I'm saying with that?
Yeah.
And I think that's a common thing because again, interviewing 300 plus authors in 2 years, you get to read a lot of books, and I start to see where the ones that hold my interest and the ones that don't. The ones that do hold my interest, I engage me within the first chapter, within the first couple of paragraphs, and I say, I feel like I'm connected here, and then I keep going. It becomes a page turner, and then there are other books where it just feels like I have to read this, and two chapters in, I'm feeling like I'm still not getting it. I don't think this is connecting to me.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that at all?
Well, a lot of times what happens is authors feel compelled to describe the scene in extreme detail or the
Like
character in extreme detail, before
like my wife when she comes home to tell me about her day. It's like a lot of details, and I'm not a detail guy.
Exactly. It would be better to start out with an event. He jumped off the sidewalk and almost got hit by a bus. Now, he didn't describe who he was, but there's something happened. Right. Why did he jump off? Okay. Picked himself up, and he found in his pocket a wad of money. Right. So you hook the reader. You give them a situation that's exciting, that happens right away, so they'll want to know more. And the idea here is that you don't have to develop the character in the first paragraph. You don't have to develop the entire scene in detail. I didn't tell you what street it was on, what city it was in, what time of day it was. Nothing. It was the event that captured you. It was the action that captured you. And that's very critical for people who need to have that feedback right away. It's not supposed to be a text from the library in Cambridge to tell you about safety and crossing streets and avoiding buses. I mean, who wants to read that?
Right. Yeah, I get it. How much of you gets into your protagonist? And this is a question I ask a lot, and a lot of authors kind of get a little defensive about that question too, because I'm assuming the question assumes that at least some of the protagonist has you in it, and I think some of them get a little defensive about that. But how much of you actually ends up in your protagonist, in Harold?
Well, Harold, yes. Actually, I kind of identify with Harold a little bit. I was bored. want to do some fun. I love to write. And so that was the part that helped me make this flow. Because, yes, that was part of me.
Does that make making the choices about his actions complicated for you? Because I always think about this when especially when writing nonfiction. Sometimes you have to have your characters doing things that are not necessarily in within your values or ethics or morals, and
Right.
that's got to feel a little funny sometimes. Like I'm gonna make, I want to like this guy, but now I'm gonna make him do something that I would that somebody I wouldn't like would do.
Yeah.
Does that complicate things for you, or do you feel like you have that kind of personal connection with the characters you've created, and now I got to make them do something that I don't want to make them do.
Yeah. To me, that is situational. If you put the character in a situation that he's not used to doing, for example, he's trapped, he's being held a prisoner, but he realizes in order to escape, maybe he has to not strangle somebody, but make them hurt pretty bad so they can get out of their way. I typically don't write where the character would necessarily do something evil, or at least not my character, not the main character, uh, because I'm trying to reach a certain audience. I'm trying to write it for a certain age range. And I don't know exactly who that audience is. I have a general idea. There are authors who have their character that is let's say, he's just out of prison. He was in prison because he was a thief, but now he gets into another group and he has to steal in order to provide money for his ailing wife or something like this. When his morals say, no, don't do it. But then you identify with the character's struggle and you identify that he's doing something he doesn't want to do, but the circumstances require him to do it at least once. And those are more complex stories where you develop more of the person's internal struggle. And that has some good aspects of developing the story, because if you develop your story around a character, you have a lot more chance of that being accepted in other media forms, other processes that look for storylines, especially today, identifying with an individual's struggle with survival, in that they're in a certain situation today, economically or physically, and they need to overcome something that they struggle to do,
Right.
but they need to do it in order to overcome that.
Interesting. You got me thinking about. I had one of my very first celebrity interviews was with Bill Fichtner, who's been in The Crash, and he's in a series now called Mom, but he was in a series called Prison Break. Been in a lot of movies, Longest Yard, a lot of things like this. But I asked him about the difficulty of playing a character who might be a bad guy, and
Yeah.
he told me, it's difficult at first, that the idea of, because some of that has to be in you in order to portray it.
Hmm.
So in writing that stuff, writing the dark stuff, the stuff that is your challenges, whatever, there's good and evil in every situation and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But when you're writing the dark side, yeah, facing the fact that that came from you in some way, and
Hmm.
the idea that it's in you. What is your belief on that? On that, is that just a mechanism for us dealing with the darker side of our own personas, or what is that?
Well, that's a good point. I'm not a psychologist, so
Yeah.
technically I can't explain it myself, other than if you've had experience either through reading or personal experience or character development. For example, in acting, and I've done that before, so I know what he's talking about. The best actor acts the way he feels. And in order for him to feel evil or bad, or in a situation where he's the bad guy, he has to imagine what those emotions would be and play to those emotions. We all have them. Everybody has a yin and yang. Everybody has a good and bad. Some people have more control over the bad. Some people don't.
Right.
So accessing that doesn't mean you're a bad person. But if the accessing that helps you explain the character's struggle and what they're doing, kind of gives the reader a little bit more insight. Like I have a bad guy in this story where he blames everybody else for his situation. Oh, that guy's thinks he's smart, but I know better. Or they should recognize me because I'm great. He's struggling with those dark sides because the dark sides have taken over his persona completely, and people will identify with some of that. So it's important that it's recognized in your characters. It's important to use it in your characters because more people will say, "Oh gosh, yeah, I felt like that. Maybe I shouldn't do that anymore."
Right.
So yes, you do access it. We all have it. Depends on how much that you let it influence your decisions.
Interesting. I had Bob Yari on, who produced the movie Crash, just 2 nights ago, and he's a Oscar-winning producer. And we were talking about lately. It seems like a trend, but I think it's an interesting trend in this idea of characters who are flawed, but they are the protagonist, even though they're a bad guy, like Tony Soprano. And we were talking specifically about Yellowstone because he produces that show. Kevin Costner is like that. He's like a Western mob boss of some sort. But we're rooting for this guy who is flawed. He's a bad guy in some ways, but still he's the protagonist, and we want to see things work out for him. That's an interesting dynamic to even approach, and I think it's probably a healthy thing, but it's probably you have to have some skill level. I mean, you wouldn't start off writing characters like that because it's got to be a difficult wire to walk in developing a believable character that you can
Mm,
relate to, that
mm-hmm,
you want to root for, but
mm-hmm.
still some ways is a bad guy. You have
Yeah,
any input on
yeah.
that?
I've seen that approach in several books and movies. The interesting thing about that is you can take a look at situations that people find themselves in and how they use the bad guy side of them as a form of control and protection, yet they have a soft spot. Um, the bad guy might, for example, he's an assassin, but he treats it as a business and he tries to stay away from getting involved in who he's going to kill. But then he runs across this young woman and he likes her character and what she does. She's stubborn, she stands up for herself, but she's marked for assassination and he gets the ticket. And so he's a bad guy, but then he protects her and spares her and hides her from the people that want to kill her through him.
Right.
And that's been a theme in movies where, yeah, these guys are really bad, but there is a little bit in them that's still good. And you root for that good part. You don't root for the bad part.
Right.
Okay. And so when you develop a character that way, you have to make sure, yeah, he's a bad guy. So you establish that. But you also see that maybe the $5,000 he gets for whacking somebody, he takes 3,000 of it and puts in a coffer for the orphans or something. I mean, you see that little good part.
Right.
And
That's
yeah,
so cool, man. I appreciate the deepness of that because it makes us realize that uh and not to get too philosophical here, but there but for the grace of God go I mean the
yeah.
fact that we could all and we all have the potential to end up in a challenging place for
Mm,
our own personal character,
mhm.
that we have to kind of weigh what to do against our own values and against the situation that we're in, that's always, it makes us look inside. It helps us grow as people in personal development and all that stuff, but it's, you have to have the introspection to actually pick up on it in the first place. And
Yeah.
some just want to let the story wash over them, and I guess that's okay. But I'm intrigued by that dynamic of understanding the good in people, like even the Godfather. We knew that guy was a murderer,
Yeah,
but still we were rooting for Marlon Brando. We were rooting for Michael Corleone in some
yeah, that's
sense.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Before we went on the air, we were talking a little bit, and I noticed that you had that limitless boundary in where most
Mm.
people will put their names. And I asked you about that, and you started to tell me about it, and I said, "Stop! This is for the show." Uh, can you talk a little bit about why you have limitless boundary in there?
Limitless boundary was a concept I came up with to mentor young authors or other people. And the idea here is you really don't have any boundaries. You may think you do. You may think you can't do this because of that or can't do that because of this. Those things essentially you have put on yourself. And you say, "Oh no, I just don't have the money to publish this thing." All right, you don't have it today, but that doesn't mean you won't have it tomorrow. The fact that you cut yourself off narrows your thinking. The idea with limitless boundary is to broaden your thinking. By broadening your thinking in various ways, it's not just limited to one thing. Broadening your thinking brings more opportunity to you. If you take a look at, let's say you want to write your book, and you say, "Well, how do I do that? Where do I start?" Well, you start very simply. You start by writing it down in concept form. Then you put up on the wall, for example, near someplace you're going to look every day. "Hey, I'm a great author." Just a simple statement. And then you put another 2 or 3 paragraphs down, and then you put up another statement. "I can write every day." The key here is to move your mind from a place of closure, "I can't write, I'm not a good author,"
Right.
to a position of opening. And at first it'll be a little bit like, "Oh yeah, who are you to tell yourself this? Who are you to say that you can do this and not?" It's got to start somewhere. And if it doesn't start here, it's not going to start here, because everything here starts here.
Well, if I may interrupt there, I think a good antidote to that who are you to tell yourself you can do this? Who are you to tell yourself you can't do this?
There you go. There you go.
Right?
Yeah.
Who's to say you can't? I mean, I think part of that is we're conditioned to believe we can, that
Yeah.
only other people can do this and that kind of stuff. And it's just a lie we tell ourselves, and it's a very unproductive lie.
Yep.
I mean, listen to me. I'm talking like I live this. I don't. I beat myself up over it all the time. That imposter syndrome, because I'm a very prolific writer, but
Yeah.
I beat myself up over it all the time. And after
Well, ask
so
yourself, ask
what I'm.
yourself,
Oh, go
what,
ahead.
why are you paying attention to that? Why are you paying attention to that statement? You could just as easily pay attention to the statement that "I can."
Yeah,
It's
you're right.
right. So, and it's a matter of conditioning, either through your youth or through you're doing it to yourself now. You're doing it over and over and over, and that just reinforces that. Why not? I mean, why not? Like, for example, I had a career in the technical industry for 35 years. I retired from that when the companies I were in basically collapsed. So all my life, I was interested in acting. I'd been an actor as a kid and done other things, and I was in my 60s. And I said, "You know what? I'm just going to go down to Hollywood and get into acting. Why not?" Now, right, I'm in my 60s, right? You don't have any acting talent. You don't have a career in that. What are you doing? And I said to myself, "Why not?
Why not?
Why not?"
I
And
think too many people will answer that and come up with good, whether they really are good reasons or not, good reasons why not, and that's what keeps them from living the life that they want to live. Is
yes,
I will. Well, we can't move there. I can't sell the house. Why not? So I'm just going to invent why not, because now I've challenged myself to come up with why nots. So I will. And I think that's unfortunate, because that's you only live once, and life is not a dress rehearsal. These are all
it's
cliches,
not.
but they're important to understand that if you want to do something, do it. Live the
Yeah.
life. I
Yeah.
think that's part of it.
Yeah.
You talked before about the difference between nonfiction and fiction, and I think it's the same for both. I think what I'm about to talk about applies to both, because I'm working on a nonfiction book, and talking to Bob Yari the other night about his book, I questioned him on the order of, because he knew the story he wanted to tell. It's a nonfiction book about the human condition, and he knew what he wanted to say. But I questioned why he started where he did and why he put stuff in the order. And he said, that's a great question. I struggled with that, and I'm not sure why, but I just felt like this was the way to go. With my book, I'm facing a very similar question. I know the story I want to tell, but not sure where I really want to begin to tell that story. Can you talk a little bit about how you work that out, where you find your starting point in it, especially when you already know the entire story you want to tell, but now
Mm.
it's a matter of in what order where do I pick it up from? Where do I, because I could use a flashback at some point, but I'm not
Mm.
sure. You not always want to start like I was born this day, it's that kind of.
Well, are you talking about a nonfiction book or a
Yeah,
fiction?
I think it applies to both. If you know the story that you want to tell, sometimes finding out where you want your starting point to be can be a difficult thing. No?
It depends on your opening. Uh, there was a character, I mean, an author, Clive Cussler. He always opened with a paragraph or a chapter of something that happened 1,000 years ago,
Right.
and something dramatic happened. And then his next chapter is current day. This team is going out on a treasure hunt for a sunken ship, and he evolves from there. So his way is grabbing your attention first to set what the whole story is going to be about. You can do that in fiction or nonfiction. In nonfiction, you could start with a summary at the beginning. I found myself in this situation, and I ended up being this kind of a person. How did I get there? Then your story starts. You can do it in nonfiction, like Clive Cussler did, where you have a situation that happened long ago, and then out of that, it falls into the current day. In the pen of this particular one, Sultan's Wisdom, I started with the man was bored, so he went to an antique store, found this pen that he thought, oh, it'd be cool to write with. And then the situation happened with him where the pen wrapped around his arm and started writing its own story. Now you've got a situation that saying people are going, whoa, what's going on here? I've already got a second book out, different character, same idea. This woman goes into an antique store to find an old pen. Happens to be the same strange, mysterious antique store. She doesn't know that. But then her experiences dealing with the Templar Knights. So she has dream travels back in that time. So the whole concept here is you set the situation at the beginning of how the story is going to flow or where it's headed. And you can do that in nonfiction, you can do it through basically a summary chapter, an introduction chapter, or a preview, overview of where you are now and working backwards how you got there.
Right.
And that way you can start it out how you got there in the following chapters. And you'll know by here's where I am. How did I get here? And you work your way backwards. And there's your beginning.
Right. I know authors have many different MOs and methodologies for how they work, and some actually do have the whole story a thought or in their minds before they start writing, and some it develops as they're writing and all that kind of stuff. But there's also the idea of how much research and how much notes you do and all that kind of stuff. But it sounds like from what you're talking about, especially because there's some historical aspect, that you probably have a lot of research to do. Or do you not care about that? I mean, because in some sense, the actual factual nature of the history doesn't matter as much as the spirit or the the idea that you're trying to portray about the history. And with like the time of Knights or Arabian Nights or Templar Knights, we
Right.
have an idea of what that's about. So we don't really
Right.
care if you're,
Right.
hysterically accurate on all the facts and all that stuff. But talk to me about that research and how much you do.
Research, Google.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot easier now than it was.
It was. But I only asked certain historical facts, like the money they used in Al-Hamid's life was a real coin that was issued during that time. His lifestyle, being in part of his life was as a Bedouin, and how that worked and how the tribe worked and what the concept was there. So I tried to give enough accurate detail historically to immerse the reader. I didn't get into the point, well, this tribe has this kind of dress or this kind of horse or this kind of armament. But I gave you the flavor based on real history so that you felt you were there. Because if I can't get the reader immersed in the story, I'm gonna lose them, and
Right.
it doesn't become entertaining any longer.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about work ethic. In the beginning of this conversation, you mentioned consistency. And I think at least the most successful writers I've talked to, I think are probably on the same page that it's important to have a regimen. I write from this time to this time every day. And I know there are some successful writers who don't necessarily adhere to that. But I think some of the most successful writers do that. Now I'm wondering what your approach to that is. Is it every day at a certain time, or what?
Well, it depends on how soon you want to publish. Stephen King writes 2,000 words every time he sits down, and he publishes in 3 months.
Wow.
Okay. So if you sit down and write 200 words a day, that's fine, but you're not going to get your book done real soon. Stories tend to flow for nonfiction writers, or for fiction writers, tend to flow in spurts. Some days I'll sit down and I'll write for 2 or 3 hours. Some days I can only get enough down for half an hour. But the consistency of doing it every day is what's going to get you there.
What about if you get to that point where you've written all you can for that book that day, and now you need time to reflect? Do you just write other stuff just for the
Well,
mechanics of staying fluid?
I have probably 8 or 9 other books floating around in my head, partially started, partially not started. That's my curse.
Me too. I mean, with songs, I'm the same way. I think to my own detriment sometimes. Like I have 22 music beds that I've written, and I'm writing lyrics for them. And it's just like sometimes I have many of them like almost finished. Like they just
Yeah.
need one more verse or a little bit on the final chorus or something.
Yeah.
And then I get not bored with it, but just stuck. And then I go on to something else, and then I find that more interesting, and then I forget about the one I was working on. Sometimes that could be detrimental, but I can't help myself. It's the way I've done it for 60 years, and I don't think I'm going to change that, at any point.
But you're right. Sometimes I will be writing on this particular storyline. I'm going, it's just not working for me right now. What if I write on this other story? Oh yeah, I've got really cool ideas. And then I left this person hanging from a cliff with their fingernails. What happened to that guy? Oh, I got to go back and find out.
Right.
A lot of times stories for me unwrap with different situations that I hadn't planned on, that I find develop in the story. So for me, writing is also an experience of exploration and adventure that I find. Sometimes I'll stop and play my banjo, just something else to provide a different relief, because your mind will work on these other things in your subconscious, whether you realize it or not. It's churning all the time. But if you change the venue to playing music, listening to music, doing something completely different, and then get back to it, you'll find you'll have a different view.
Yeah. Once you said banjo, I kind of went, "Whoa, banjo." Uh, 4 string or 5 string?
Yeah.
Both? 4 string or 5 string?
Oh, 5.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bluegrass player? You
Oh,
like?
I'm trying to be.
Wow, good for
I'm
you.
learning a few tunes
Has
and
anybody ever said to you that you kind of have a resemblance for Neil Young?
no, actually not. That's
Yeah.
kind of interesting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was actually when you said banjo, I was like, well, that's a good thing. That's a good look. You could be a Neil Young impersonator.
Hey,
I
another
don't know if they
career
have
thought,
such a
right?
thing. Well, yeah, it's been an interesting talk, and I'm glad you came by. Again, I want to plug the book here if we can. It's called The Pen. Now, Sultan's Wisdom. You said you have another book out already? Oh, for this series?
Well, this one is now in audio form, so you
Right.
can get it in Audible. It's also sold on any store that sells books online. I do have the second book to this series because it's called the Dream Traveler Series, Book 1. I've got Book 2 about 80% done, and I've got the idea for Book 3.
All right.
So Book 2 should be out, probably published in the beginning of next year. I'm going to hand it to my editor sometime in October, November. We'll work through it, get the layout done and all of this, and then actually have it in print at the beginning of next year. So
Gotcha.
I hope to let people know when it's coming so that they can pre-sign up for it so that they're in line to pick the book up right away. And then I'll do an audio on that as well. So this will be a series of at least 3 books.
Gotcha. And we have your website, thepen.dennisgalloway.com. And the link is in the description to make it easy for people. Now, audiobooks. Did you read the book for the audiobook, or do you have a voiceover artist do it?
Actually, I did the audio.
Okay.
I had a really good audio engineer who helped me with it. And my wife was part of the character for the female in this book. So it wrapped in really well because he was able to add sound effects, some music, different character voice ranges. So it's not monotone.
Right.
You're able to identify the characters in the audible as a different person instead of just somebody reading the book. So it's more like you're listening to a play or you're listening to a movie.
Yeah.
That was the whole intent of creating the audio, as if you were hearing a movie.
Old
And
time radio. The
old
shadow.
time,
The
yeah,
shadow do.
that's right.
Yeah. Was that a fulfilling experience? Did you enjoy the experience
Oh,
of doing?
it was awesome. It
I
was
can,
really
I can
awesome.
imagine. I would think it would be. A lot of authors, who when it comes down to the audiobook, don't want to hear themselves reading it and give it off to voiceover people. But I would think, from my perspective, I wrote this damn thing. I should be the one reading it.
Well,
Who-
you get a good engineer, and
yeah.
they can change your voice,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
so it doesn't have to be you.
Right. Right. Yeah. Very good stuff. Anyway, I appreciate your time here. I wish you success with the book, and
Thank you.
doors always open when the next book comes out. If you want to come by and talk about it, or just continue the conversation about the writer's process and the value in being an author and pursuing your dreams and all that kind of stuff, love to have you back. And I appreciate your time. I wish you great success with it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Have a good day, and bye for
You
now.
too. Bye bye.